Imagine closing your eyes for the last time, only to awaken in a world shaped not by silence, but by strange rivers, bridges of fire, gods weighing your soul, or endless journeys across shadowy landscapes. For ancient people, death was not the end. It was only the beginning of a mysterious journey into realms of wonder, fear, and sometimes even beauty. Across cultures, people held incredible beliefs about what came after life, each one reflecting their hopes, their fears, and their understanding of the cosmos. From Egyptian pharaohs preparing for their voyage through the Duat, to Norse warriors destined to feast in Valhalla, to the Mayan souls who braved trials in the dark underworld of Xibalba, the human imagination has always sought to give meaning to the greatest mystery of all: what lies beyond death. Welcome to History for Sleep *, the channel where history meets calm storytelling. If you've ever struggled to drift off at night, you're in the right place. Here, we explore the wonders of the past in a soothing, relaxing way perfect for unwinding, learning, and finally getting the rest you deserve. Tonight, we'll journey together through some of the weirdest and most fascinating ancient beliefs about the afterlife. As you listen, you might find your thoughts slowing down, your breathing becoming steady, and your body easing into the comfort of rest. Before we begin, I'd love for you to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new episode of Bedtime History. It helps the channel grow and ensures you always have something relaxing to fall asleep to. Also, let me know in the comments what periods of history fascinate you the most, and when you usually listen in, whether it's at bedtime, while winding down after work, or in the middle of a restless night. Your comments help shape what stories we bring to you next. So settle in, get comfortable, let the noise of the day fade away. Together, we'll walk through ancient gates, cross rivers of myth, and explore the afterlife as countless cultures once imagined it. For the ancient Egyptians, death was never viewed as an abrupt end, but as a passage into another form of existence. Life, they believed, was simply one stage in a much larger cycle. To them, the body might wither, but the soul, composed of different parts, would endure. This is why their tombs were not merely graves, but carefully constructed portals into eternity. Within these stone chambers, pharaohs and commoners alike prepared for the great voyage through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. It was not a simple descent into darkness, but a perilous journey filled with obstacles, gods, and trials designed to test the worthiness of the departed. The Duat was imagined as a vast and complex realm, a landscape filled with lakes of fire, rivers of water, caverns of darkness, and gates guarded by fearsome beings. Each night, the sun god Ra himself traveled through this underworld, battling chaos before rising once more in the dawn. Just as the sun returned each day, so too could the human soul hope to be reborn, provided it passed its trials. Egyptians envisioned the afterlife as a mirror of their own world, with fields, crops, and familiar activities, yet purified and eternal. It was often called the Field of Reeds, a paradise where one could enjoy the pleasures of life without hunger, toil, or sorrow. But reaching this idyllic state was no simple matter. Upon death, the Egyptians believed the soul began its journey with the Ka and Ba, two essential aspects of the self. The Ka was a kind of life force, a double of the individual that required sustenance. Offerings of bread, beer, and meat were placed in tombs to feed it. The Ba, often represented as a bird with a human head, was the soul's mobility, allowing it to travel between worlds. Both Ka and Ba needed to reunite with the preserved body to ensure eternal survival. This is why mummification was so crucial. By carefully embalming and wrapping the corpse, the Egyptians created a vessel that would endure, allowing the spirit to live on and make its journey. The voyage through the Duat was mapped out in funerary texts like the Book of the Dead *, a collection of spells, prayers, and instructions written on papyrus and placed in tombs. These spells served as a guidebook for the deceased, equipping them with the words of power needed to bypass dangers. Some of the most vivid illustrations come from tomb walls, where painted scenes depict the soul encountering gates guarded by serpents or lions, each demanding a password. To fail to answer correctly was to be denied passage, trapped in eternal shadow. To answer wisely was to move one step closer to paradise. The heart, in Egyptian thought, was the seat of the soul and the essence of truth. In the hall of Mat, the deceased would stand before Osiris, Lord of the dead, alongside a tribunal of 42 judges. There, Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming, placed the heart of the departed on a scale, weighing it against the feather of Mat, the goddess of truth and cosmic balance. This moment determined everything. If the heart was pure, balanced, and light, the soul was deemed righteous, worthy of entering the eternal fields. But if the heart was heavy with lies, cruelty, or injustice, it would tip the scale. The soul would then be devoured by Ammit, the monstrous creature with the head of a crocodile, the mane of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. For the Egyptians, this was the worst fate imaginable, not eternal torment, but annihilation, the total erasure of existence. Even for those who succeeded, the journey was long and fraught with challenges. The deceased would need to know sacred names of gods, to recognize symbols, and to pass rivers guarded by crocodiles. Spells from the asterisk Book of the Dead asterisk often provided incantations such as, "I am not guilty, I am not impure," repeated as affirmations before divine judges. This negative confession listed sins the soul claimed never to have committed, from theft and murder to disrespect of gods and elders. Each line was a statement of moral purity, building a case for entry into paradise. One of the most beautiful aspects of Egyptian afterlife belief was its emphasis on continuity with earthly life. The field of reeds was not a place of radical transformation, but a perfected version of the Nile Valley. Families would reunite, workers would enjoy endless harvests, and nobles would feast. Instead of abandoning their world, the Egyptians sought to preserve it eternally, free of suffering. The dead required the same comforts they had in life, which is why tombs were filled with food, furniture, clothing, jewelry, even board games. The belief was that all these goods would accompany the soul, becoming real in the next life. Wealthier Egyptians could afford elaborate tombs filled with treasures, while poorer families offered clay models of servants or farms, magical substitutes that would serve their loved ones in eternity. This devotion to preparing for death reveals much about Egyptian culture. Life and death were not opposites, but complementary stages of existence. Pharaohs commissioned massive pyramids and tombs, not out of vanity alone, but as a duty to ensure their soul's survival. Priests performed rituals to preserve cosmic order, believing that every individual's journey reflected the greater balance of the universe. To live in harmony with Mat during life was to prepare for judgment in death. Daily morality, religious piety, and social order were all tied to one's eternal fate. The role of the gods in this journey was immense. Osiris, the once murdered king who triumphed over death, offered a model of resurrection. Isis, his devoted wife, embodied the protective mother guiding souls. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, recorded the results of the judgment. Horus, the falcon god, sometimes appeared as a protector. Together, these divine figures created a cosmic theater in which each soul's drama was played out. Every Egyptian, regardless of rank, had to step onto this stage and prove their worth. And yet, belief was not rigid. Over centuries, the conception of the afterlife evolved. In earlier times, only pharaohs were thought to have access to the heavens, joining Ra in his solar bark. But gradually, the promise of eternal life extended to nobles, then to common people. By the New Kingdom, nearly anyone who lived a just life and could afford proper burial rites could hope for a blessed afterlife. This democratization of eternity reflected a profound truth. In the end, All were equal before Osiris. For the modern mind, these beliefs may seem strange, even elaborate, but they reveal an enduring human need to find meaning in death. To the Egyptians, life without the hope of continuity would have been unimaginable. Their pyramids, their texts, their careful rituals of embalming and burial, these were not simply cultural artifacts, but the manifestation of a longing shared by all people to believe that death is not the end, but a doorway to something greater. As you imagine yourself lying in a chamber lit by flickering torches, painted walls alive with symbols of gods and spirits, you can almost hear the whisper of spells guiding you onward. You step into the darkness of the Duat, clutching your heart, your truth, your prayers. Before you lies the scale, the feather, and the eyes of Osiris. What happens next depends not on power or wealth, but on the weight of your soul. Long before the Egyptians built their pyramids, the people of Mesopotamia, the Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians were telling stories about the land of the dead. Their beliefs, written on clay tablets in the wedge-shaped strokes of cuneiform, reveal an afterlife far darker than the shining field of reeds. For the Mesopotamians, the underworld was a place of dust and shadows, ruled by stern gods and cut off from the warmth of the living. It was not a paradise to strive for, but a dim and inevitable fate awaiting all, whether king or commoner. The Mesopotamian afterlife was known as Erkala, the land of no return. Once a soul descended into its gates, there was no escape. In their vision, the dead lived on in a dreary existence, not in torment, but in monotony. They ate dust as food and clay as bread, drank murky water, and lingered in shadows. Unlike the Egyptians, who offered hope of eternal bliss, Mesopotamians expected little joy after death. The underworld was ruled by Ereshkigal, the goddess of the dead, sister to the great goddess of love and war, Inanna. With her consort Nergal, god of plague and destruction, Ereshkigal presided over this realm from a throne of darkness, her gaze heavy and merciless. The entrance to the underworld lay through 7 gates. Each soul passing through was stripped of clothing, jewelry, and symbols of power, until nothing remained but their essence. This imagery of shedding possessions emphasized the Mesopotamian view that death equalized everyone. Kings, warriors, and priests might be honored in life, but in death they joined the same crowd of shades dwelling in dust. It was a vision of humility and resignation, one that mirrored the precarious life in Mesopotamia's floodplains, where the rivers could both nourish and destroy without warning. The myth of Inanna's descent offers one of the richest depictions of this realm. Inanna, goddess of love and fertility, sought to visit her sister Ereshkigal. At each gate of the underworld, the gatekeeper demanded she remove an item of clothing or adornment. By the time she reached Ereshkigal, she was naked and powerless. The queen of the underworld struck her dead and hung her on a hook. The world above withered in her absence. Crops failed, animals stopped breeding, and humanity languished. Only after 3 days and 3 nights did other gods intervene to bring her back, reminding listeners of the fragile boundary between life and death. The story symbolized not just mortality, but also cycles of fertility, decay, and renewal life's dependence on forces beyond human control. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest works of literature in the world, adds another layer to these beliefs. When Gilgamesh's beloved companion Enkidu dies, he descends into despair, realizing that even kings cannot escape death. In his grief, he dreams of Enkidu's shade, who describes the underworld in haunting words. A place where kings serve as common laborers, where even the mightiest warriors must fetch water like servants. It was a world that erased earthly distinctions, pressing all into the same gray sameness. Gilgamesh's fear of death drives him to seek immortality, but he fails, teaching the ancient lesson that mortality is inescapable. Mesopotamians did not completely abandon the dead to shadows. The living played a vital role in maintaining some comfort for their ancestors. Families performed regular offerings of food and drink at tombs, hoping that the shades would not go hungry or thirsty. Neglecting these rituals was dangerous, for forgotten spirits might return as restless ghosts, bringing illness, misfortune, or madness. Thus, funerary offerings were acts of both devotion and self-protection. The bond between the living and the dead remained, sustained through memory and ritual. Unlike the Egyptians, who preserved bodies with elaborate care, Mesopotamians buried their dead beneath homes or in communal cemeteries. Tombs were modest, often sealed with jars of water, bread, and beer. These offerings were not seen as eternal supplies, but as nourishment that the living would continue to renew through ceremonies. Priests sometimes recited incantations to appease spirits, reminding the dead of their place in Urkala, while ensuring they did not disturb the living world. It was a delicate balance keeping the dead content, but contained. The fear of ghosts was strong in Mesopotamian culture. Spirits of those who had died violently, without proper burial, or without descendants to care for them, were thought to wander restlessly. Some appeared in dreams, others caused illness or accidents. Protective spells, amulets, and rituals were developed to ward off such intrusions. This constant awareness of restless dead reveals how deeply the Mesopotamians felt the weight of mortality, and how much they feared a breakdown of order between worlds. Still, their bleak vision of the afterlife was not entirely without nuance. In some traditions, those who died heroically in battle, or who were especially favored by the gods, might find a slightly brighter place in the underworld, closer to the gods themselves, but these were rare exceptions. For most, death meant entering a land where memories of sunlight were dim, where even laughter became a faint echo, and where existence was endured rather than enjoyed. This somber worldview reflected the environment of Mesopotamia. Living between the unpredictable Tigris and Euphrates rivers, people faced sudden floods, droughts, and invasions. Life could be cruel, and their vision of the afterlife mirrored that uncertainty and struggle. Unlike Egyptian optimism, or later Greek philosophies of reward and punishment, Mesopotamian beliefs offered no escape from the shadowed halls of Urkala. The best one could hope for was a proper burial, devoted descendants, and peace from restless wandering. As you imagine lying beneath the earth, dust settling over your form, you can sense the slow silence of Urkala. Around you are countless shades, their eyes dim, their voices hushed. The gates have closed behind you, and the path forward leads only into deeper shadow. Yet you are not alone. The whispers of the living above reach you still in the form of offerings, prayers, and remembrance. In this quiet, endless place, you drift with the others, bound by the shared destiny of all who once lived under the sun. For the ancient Greeks, death was not a simple passing, but a journey into a vast and layered realm beneath the earth. They called it Hades, after its ruler, the stern god who reigned in shadow. Unlike the bright and vivid Thales of Olympus, where gods feasted and quarreled, the underworld was a place of solemnity, mystery, and sometimes terror. Every Greek, from the humblest farmer to the greatest warrior, knew that at the end of life they would face the crossing into this domain, where rivers marked boundaries and judges weighed fates. The journey began at the moment of death, when the soul, or psyche, slipped free from the body, often envisioned as a breath or a small winged figure fluttering away. The first task of the soul was to find its way to the banks of the river Styx, the most famous of the underworld's rivers. There it met Charon, the grim ferryman who carried souls across in his boat. Charon demanded a fee, usually a coin, such as an obol, placed in the mouth of the deceased during burial. Without this payment, the soul could not cross and was doomed to wander the shores, restless and unfulfilled. This ritual of the coin was so deeply ingrained that even the poorest families made sure to provide one, for the fate of being left behind was unbearable. Once ferried across, the soul entered the realm of Hades itself. The Greeks imagined this world as divided by rivers and guarded by fearsome beings. The 5 rivers each carried symbolic weight. Styx, the river of hatred, bound gods themselves with unbreakable oaths. Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, washed away memories, so that some souls drank from it before reincarnation, losing all trace of their former lives. Acheron, the river of sorrow, conveyed endless grief. Phlegethon, the river of fire, burned with eternal flames, while Cocytus, the river of wailing, echoed with cries of the lost. Together, these rivers defined the geography of death, sorrow, oblivion, fire, and eternal oath. At the gates of Hades stood Cerberus, the monstrous 3-headed dog. With his serpent tail and dragon's breath, Cerberus allowed souls to enter, but never to leave. Heroes in myth like Orpheus, Heracles, and Aeneas had to outwit or charm him to make their rare returns to the world above. For ordinary mortals, there was no return. Death was final, the gates closed, the journey one way. Inside, the soul was brought before 3 judges, Menes, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus. These sons of Zeus were charged with assigning each soul its place. Those who lived without remarkable virtue or wickedness, the vast majority of people, were sent to the Asphodel Meadows. Here, shades wandered in grayness, without suffering but without joy, repeating faint echoes of life. For the Greeks, this was the most common fate, a neutral existence, neither punished nor rewarded, a mirror of how ordinary lives rarely touched extremes of good or evil. But there were 2 other destinations. Souls of great wickedness were cast into Tartarus, the deepest abyss, a pit as far beneath the earth as the sky was above. Tartarus was a place of torment, where monsters and titans were bound, and where divine justice was exacted in eternal punishments. The myth of Sisyphus condemned to push a boulder up a hill, only to have it roll down forever, and that of Tantalus cursed to stand, thirsty in water that receded whenever he bent to drink, reflect this vision of endless suffering. These figures embodied the futility of resisting fate and the inevitability of divine judgment. In contrast, the righteous and heroic could enter the Elysian fields, or Elysium, a realm of eternal spring. Here, the air was gentle, the land fertile, and the days filled with music, athletic contests, and feasts. Heroes who had been favored by the gods, or who lived exceptionally virtuous lives, enjoyed this paradise. In some traditions, Elysium was reserved for demigods, and those granted special favor by Zeus. In later interpretations, it became more inclusive, a reward for the truly just. For some poets, souls could be reborn and strive again for Elysium, gradually perfecting themselves until they were freed from the cycle of reincarnation. The Greeks wove their underworld beliefs deeply into myth. Orpheus, the legendary musician, descended into Hades to retrieve his beloved Eurydice. His music charmed even Hades and Persephone, the queen of the underworld, who allowed Eurydice to follow him back on the condition that he not look behind until they reached the upper world. At the final moment, doubt overtook him. He glanced back, and Eurydice was lost forever. This tale expressed both the hope of reunion and the cruel inevitability of loss. In another myth, Heracles descended as one of his labors, wrestling Cerberus and bringing him to the surface. These stories emphasized that few could escape death, and those who tried paid a heavy price. Unlike the Mesopotamians, who saw the afterlife as bleak for all, the Greeks developed a layered vision that rewarded and punished, offering a moral framework for behavior. To live justly, honor the gods, and avoid hubris was to hope for Elysium. To defy the gods or commit crimes against family and community was to risk eternal torment. This balance reflected the Greek concern with order, moderation, and the avoidance of arrogance. Daily practices reflected these beliefs. Funerary rituals ensured that the soul would reach Hades properly. Families laid out the body, washed it, adorned it with wreaths, and sang lamentations. Burial was essential. To remain unburied meant the soul would wander restlessly, denied entrance. This belief formed the dramatic core of tragedies like Sophocles' Asterisk, Antigone Asterisk, where the heroine insists on burying her brother, defying the king's orders, because to leave him unburied was to condemn him in the afterlife. Such stories underscored the seriousness of funerary duty in Greek society. The idea of memory and forgetfulness also held deep meaning. Some mystery cults, such as those of Orpheus, taught initiates to seek water from the river Mnemosyne, the river of memory, instead of Lethe. By doing so, the soul might retain knowledge and achieve a more blessed existence after death. These secret teachings hinted at alternative paths through the underworld, reserved for those who pursued wisdom and spiritual preparation. In this way, the Greeks offered not only a common vision of death, but also esoteric variations for those who sought deeper mysteries. To imagine Hades is to imagine twilight, not complete darkness, but a place of dim forms and endless wandering. The air is heavy, the rivers slow and endless, the cries of shades soft but unrelenting. Yet somewhere in this vast land, beyond the gloom of Asphodel and the terror of Tartarus, lies the golden Elysium, where heroes rest in peace, their memories celebrated in song. The underworld was thus not merely a place of fear, but also of longing, a mirror of life's struggles, triumphs, and moral choices. As you drift in thought, picture yourself stepping into the boat of Charon, the oar dipping into the dark waters of the Styx. The shore behind fades, the living world grows distant, and ahead rise the gates guarded by Cerberus. Around you stretch the 5 rivers, each carrying whispers of sorrow, flame, or forgetfulness. You are carried onward, like countless souls before you, into the realm where all mortals go, to await your judgment and your place among the shades. Far to the north, where icy winds swept across fjords and mountains, the Norse people imagined an afterlife shaped by both harshness and honor. To the Vikings, death was not uniform, nor was it kind to all. Where a soul went after death depended on how they had lived, how they had died, and what the gods decreed. For warriors, death on the battlefield was glorious, carrying them to feasts in Valhalla or the fields of Folkvanger. But for most, the destination was Hel, the land of mist, a cold and shadowy realm that lay beneath the roots of Yggdrasil, the great world tree. Hel, the realm, and Hel, the goddess, shared the same name. The goddess Hel was described in unsettling terms. Half of her body appeared alive and beautiful, while the other half was corpse-like, darkened, or skeletal. She ruled over those who died of sickness, old age, or without honor in battle. Unlike the fiery torments of later religious visions, Hel was not always a place of punishment. It was simply the place where most souls went, a realm of shadows and quiet, separated from the living by great rivers and gates of stone. Yet within it lay a sense of unease, a reminder of the inevitability of death and the absence of glory. The entrance to Hel was guarded by Garmr, a monstrous hound chained at the gates, howling to keep intruders out and the dead within. Beyond stretched the rivers Jal and Slid, cold and fierce, carrying sharp weapons and stones in their currents. The souls who crossed into this realm traveled a road that descended steeply, passing through landscapes of snow, ice, and deep valleys. At the end stood the hall of Hel herself, called El Jornir, with high walls and a gate named Philandophora, or Falling to Peril. Within, her throne stood in solemn darkness, and her hospitality was as cold as her realm. Still, the Norse did not see this land as pure torment. Many who entered Hel were simply the ordinary dead, farmers, artisans, mothers, and children. They rested in her halls, dwelling in shadow, awaiting the final destiny of the cosmos Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. When that great battle arrived, Hel's legions of the dead would rise to march alongside Loki, the trickster god, and her monstrous kin against the gods of Asgard. Thus, the souls in Hel were not forgotten. They were part of the greater cosmic cycle, destined to play a role in the end of days. For warriors, however, another fate was possible. Those who died bravely in battle might be chosen by the Valkyries, the shining maidens of Odin, to be carried to Valhalla, the hall of the slain. There, beneath a roof made of shields and with spears for rafters, they would feast endlessly, drinking mead from the udders of a cosmic goat and eating from the flesh of a boar that renewed itself each night. Each day they fought great battles with one another, only to rise healed and feast again. It was a warrior's paradise, filled with honor, struggle, and glory, preparing them to fight alongside Odin when Ragnar came. Alternatively, half of the chosen warriors were taken to Folkvangr, the field ruled by the goddess Freya, who shared in receiving the brave dead. This duality reflected the Norse view that bravery and strength were the highest virtues, rewarded beyond death. But for those who did not die with sword in hand, hell awaited. In some sagas, this realm took on more fearful tones, described as a place of darkness, cold winds, and suffering for oathbreakers and murderers. Those who lived dishonorably or violated sacred laws might be cast into Niflhel, the lowest region of hell, associated with ice, mist, and misery. It was not eternal fire that awaited them, but endless frost and gloom. Here, the Norse imagination mirrored their own landscape, the frozen north, harsh and unforgiving, where survival was always uncertain. Funeral rituals reflected these beliefs. Warriors might be sent off in ships, set aflame upon the water, symbolizing their journey across realms. Others were buried with weapons, tools, jewelry, or even sacrificed animals and servants, meant to accompany them in the afterlife. Grave sites varied, from mounds rising over the landscape to cremation pyres. Each burial was both a farewell and a preparation, equipping the soul for what lay beyond. The dead were not abandoned. Offerings were made at their mounds, and their presence lingered in the world of the living as ancestral spirits, sometimes protective, sometimes vengeful. The Norse imagination also included ghostly beings known as **Draugr**, restless dead who rose from their graves to haunt the living. These figures, often described as swollen, dark-skinned, and incredibly strong, reflected the fear of improper burial or unresolved ties. They were thought to guard treasures in their tombs or seek revenge on the living. Stories of Draugr reminded people that the boundary between life and death was thin, and that respect for the dead was essential. In the larger cosmic order, death was woven into the fabric of fate. The Norns, the weavers of destiny, determined the length of each life, and no one, not even the gods, could escape their decrees. Death in battle was not random but fated, and to resist one's destiny was both impossible and dishonorable. This fatalism colored Norse beliefs about the afterlife. To die well was to embrace one's fate with courage. To die poorly, without honor, was to face shame in both life and death. To imagine hell is to picture a world of mist and silence, where icy rivers flow and winds whistle through stone gates. The hall of hell looms, half-lit, her presence both commanding and unsettling, her half-living form watching over the countless souls seated in her domain. Yet in this realm of cold, there is also a strange stillness, a pause in the endless cycle of life, and death, awaiting for the final battle when the dead will rise again. Above, in Asgard, warriors feast and clash, preparing for the same fate. Both Hel's quiet halls and Valhalla's roaring feasts point toward Ragnarok, when all destinies will converge. As you drift in thought, imagine the sound of distant horns, the clash of steel in Valhalla, and the low hum of voices in Hel's halls. The Norse afterlife, divided between glory and shadow, reflects not just a fear of death, but an acceptance of its role in the larger story of the cosmos. In their vision, death was not the end, but a step toward the greatest battle yet to come. In the vast landscapes of ancient China, where rivers wound through fertile valleys and dynasties, rose and fell across centuries, the afterlife was not imagined as a distant and alien realm, but as an extension of family and community. The Chinese view of death was shaped by reverence for ancestors, concern for harmony between the living and the dead, and a belief that the spirit endured in forms both protective and perilous. Unlike the fiery punishments or warriors' feasts imagined by other cultures, the Chinese afterlife centered on continuity, remembrance, and the maintenance of proper rituals to ensure peace for both the living and the departed. At the heart of these beliefs lay the practice of ancestor worship. Families believed that when someone died, their spirit lived on, watching over descendants, blessing them when honored properly, or bringing misfortune if neglected. The departed were not distant shades, but active members of the household. To maintain this bond, families kept ancestral tablets or shrines within the home, where offerings of food, incense, and drink were placed. On special occasions, such as the Qingming festival, families gathered at gravesites to clean tombs, burn incense, and make sacrifices, reaffirming the ties between generations. In this way, death was not a severing of relationships, but a transformation, linking the past and present in an unbroken chain. The soul itself was believed to consist of multiple parts, often described as the *Hun* and the *Po*. The *Hun* was the yang soul, light and ethereal, capable of ascending to the heavens, while the *Po* was the yin soul, heavy and grounded, tied to the earth and the body. At death, the two could separate, with the *Hun* rising toward celestial realms and the *Po* descending into the grave. Proper burial and ritual were essential to keep these aspects in harmony. If neglected, the *Po* might wander restlessly as a ghost, disturbing the living. Thus, burial customs were not merely acts of respect, but necessary steps to maintain cosmic balance. Funeral practices reflected this dual concern for spiritual harmony and familial duty. Bodies were often placed in elaborate coffins, accompanied by goods meant to serve the deceased in the afterlife: clothing, food, tools, weapons, or even entire models of houses and servants. In later dynasties, the practice of burning paper offerings became common. Paper money, clothes, or even paper replicas of cars and appliances in modern times symbolically provided comfort and wealth to ancestors in the afterlife. The act of burning created a bridge between worlds, sending gifts across the divide and reminding the living that their care could reach beyond death. In earlier traditions, the underworld itself was described as Diyu, a complex realm of judgment and purification. Diyu was often imagined as consisting of multiple courts or levels, presided over by stern judges known as the Kings of Hell. Each court dealt with particular sins or offenses, and souls passed through these places to be judged, punished, and eventually cleansed before reincarnation. Unlike eternal damnation, this system emphasized correction and renewal. After serving their time or learning their lessons, souls could return to the cycle of rebirth, moving on to another life in the mortal world. In this sense, death was not final, but part of a continuous process, linking one lifetime to the next. The most famous of these judges was Yan Luo Wang, a figure derived in part from Indian Buddhist traditions of Yama, the Lord of Death. As Buddhism entered China, it mingled with Taoist and Confucian beliefs, creating a rich tapestry of afterlife imagery. Buddhist ideas of karma and reincarnation blended with native traditions of ancestor worship and ghostly spirits. The result was a layered vision. Souls were judged and purified in Diyu, guided by karma from past lives, and yet remained connected to their families through ancestral rituals. In this synthesis, the afterlife was at once cosmic, moral, and personal. Ghosts played an important role in the Chinese imagination. A soul that received proper burial and offerings would remain benevolent, watching over descendants and blessing their endeavors. But a soul forgotten, wronged, or left without family might return as a hungry ghost, endlessly craving food and comfort, but never satisfied. Festivals such as the Ghost Festival in the 7th lunar month were devoted to feeding and appeasing these wandering spirits, offering them food and burning incense to prevent them from harming the living. The presence of such rituals demonstrates the Chinese concern not only with their own ancestors, but also with the neglected dead who might otherwise become dangerous. Royal tombs reflected these beliefs on a grand scale. Emperors of the Han Dynasty, for example, built vast mausoleums filled with treasures, soldiers, and symbolic objects to ensure their continued rule in the afterlife. The most famous of these is the tomb of the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, guarded by the Terracotta Army. Thousands of life-sized clay soldiers, horses, and chariots were buried to protect and serve the emperor in the next world. Such monumental burials were not mere displays of wealth, but attempts to extend earthly power into eternity, ensuring that the emperor remained surrounded by order and loyalty, even in death. Yet, for all the grandeur of emperors, the central belief remained rooted in the family. The well-being of the departed was tied to the devotion of the living. Children who honored their parents ensured blessings for themselves and their descendants. Neglect, however, risked angering the spirits, leading to illness, misfortune, or social shame. This belief reinforced Confucian values of filial piety, the duty to respect and care for parents and ancestors, creating a moral system that bound society together through shared rituals of remembrance. To imagine the Chinese afterlife is to picture a layered world, a realm of judges and courts where souls are weighed and corrected, but also a world of ancestral halls where tablets glow with incense and families speak to their forebears. It is a vision where the dead are not forgotten, but remain close, shaping the fortunes of the living. Death is not an exile into distant shadows, but a continuation of belonging, sustained through memory, ritual, and reverence. As you settle into thought, picture a family gathered around an altar, incense rising in thin streams, bowls of rice, and fruit placed before carved tablets. Outside, the graves of ancestors are swept clean, offerings burned, voices lifted in remembrance. In these acts, the living and the dead remain connected, bound across time, ensuring that no one truly disappears. In the Chinese vision, the afterlife is not only a destination, but a relationship, one that endures as long as memory and devotion persist. In the spiritual traditions of ancient India, the afterlife was not seen as a single destination, but as part of a vast cycle, endlessly repeating, shaping and reshaping the soul through lifetimes. This cycle, known as samsara, described the passage of the soul through birth, death, and rebirth, carried forward by the weight of karma. Unlike the visions of underworlds or shadowy lands in other cultures, Hindu thought placed the afterlife within a framework of cosmic law, moral consequence, and the ultimate search for liberation. At the heart of this belief is the idea of the Atman, the eternal soul or self. Unlike the body, which is perishable, the Atman is indestructible, a spark of the divine that passes through lifetimes. Just as one might change clothes, so too the soul changes bodies, leaving one form behind and taking up another. Death was not the end, but a transition, the beginning of another chapter in a much larger story. This concept offered both comfort and responsibility. Comfort in knowing the soul never truly perishes, and responsibility in realizing that one's actions in this life directly shape the next. Karma, the law of cause and effect, determined the path of the soul. Every deed, every word, every thought carried weight, planting seeds that bore fruit in the future. Good actions led to favorable rebirths, while harmful deeds could result in lives filled with suffering. The cycle of samsara was vast and impartial, encompassing humans, animals, and even divine beings. A king in one life might be reborn as a laborer in another, while a humble servant, through virtue, might rise to a higher existence. This vision of the afterlife emphasized not only morality, but also the deep interconnection of all beings. In the earliest Vedic traditions, the afterlife was imagined as a journey to the realm of ancestors, or to the heavens of the gods, sustained by rituals and sacrifices. Over time, with the development of the Upanishads, philosophical thought turned toward the idea of liberation ** moksha*. Moksha was freedom from the endless wheel of samsara, release from the burden of rebirth, and union with the eternal reality, known as * Brahman*. To achieve this liberation was the highest goal, surpassing all temporary pleasures or pains of earthly existence. The paths to moksha were many, reflecting the richness of Hindu philosophy. Some pursued knowledge, * Jnana Yoga *, seeking to understand the true nature of the self and the cosmos, piercing the illusion of separation. Others followed the path of devotion, * Bhakti Yoga *, surrendering themselves to the love of a deity such as Vishnu, Shiva, or Devi, finding salvation through grace and worship. Still others sought discipline through action, * Karma Yoga *, or meditation, * Raja Yoga *, aligning body, mind, and spirit with cosmic truth. These varied approaches revealed a profound inclusivity, allowing each soul to find its own way toward liberation. The imagery of the afterlife in Hindu tradition was rich and varied. Some texts describe Yama, the god of death, who judges the souls of the departed. Guided by messengers, the soul would stand before him, its deeds weighed. Yet unlike the final judgments of other cultures, this reckoning was not eternal condemnation or reward, but guidance for the next stage of rebirth. The punishments or rewards experienced in Yama's realm were temporary, shaping the trajectory of the soul's next life. Even suffering in hellish realms was seen as a purification, not an endless torment. The ultimate goal remained moksha, release from the entire cycle. Funeral rites were deeply important in ensuring the soul's safe passage. Cremation was common, the fire symbolizing purification and the soul's release from the body. Ashes were often scattered in sacred rivers, such as the Ganges, believed to aid in the soul's journey. Rituals known as * Shraddha * were performed by descendants to honor ancestors, offering food and prayers to ensure their peace. Just as in Chinese traditions, the bond between living and dead remained vital, sustained by duty and reverence. The Hindu imagination also included visions of heavenly realms, such as * Svarga *, where virtuous souls enjoyed pleasures among the gods. Yet even these heavens were temporary, lasting only until the merit that earned them was exhausted. Then the soul returned to samsara, reborn once more. In this sense, even paradise was impermanent, reminding devotees that only moksha was true liberation. Hellish realms, too, were temporary, places where souls endured suffering before re-entering the cycle. This vision of impermanence contrasted with cultures that envisioned eternal fates, emphasizing instead the transformative, fluid nature of existence. Reincarnation carried profound ethical implications. To harm others was not merely a sin in the moment, but a weight carried forward into future lives. Compassion, nonviolence, and respect for all living beings became natural extensions of this worldview. The cow, for instance, came to be revered as a symbol of life and abundance, protected from harm. The idea that one's enemy in this life might have been a friend in another, or that today's beggar might be tomorrow's king, created a sense of humility and interconnectedness. The cycle of samsara was not only a burden, but also a hope. For those suffering, it offered the promise that their present hardships were not eternal, that better rebirths could follow. For the virtuous, it affirmed that their efforts would not be in vain. And for the seeker, it pointed beyond the cycle altogether, toward union with the eternal. To imagine the Hindu afterlife, is to picture a soul moving through countless forms, born as human, animal, or even celestial being, shaped by the unseen thread of karma. It is to picture Yama's realm, where deeds are weighed, followed by rebirth into new circumstances. It is to envision luminous heavens of temporary joy, shadowed hells of purification, and beyond them all, the shining goal of moksha, freedom, unity, and peace beyond measure. In this vision, death is not an end, but a passage, part of a cosmic rhythm that carries all souls toward ultimate truth. As you drift into thought, imagine the flow of the Ganges, carrying ashes and prayers, its waters reflecting both loss and renewal. Imagine the soul rising like a spark, leaving one life behind, seeking another. And beyond the endless cycle, imagine a stillness, a light, where the soul rests in unity, free at last from birth and death. This is the heart of the Hindu vision, a journey without end, yet always moving toward liberation. Among the Aztecs of ancient Mexico, the afterlife was a realm of incredible complexity, filled with trials, dangers, and transformations. Death was not viewed as a single fate, but as many paths, determined not only by how a person lived, but also by how they died. Unlike some cultures that imagined paradise for the virtuous and punishment for the wicked, the Aztecs believed that the manner of death was the key to one's destiny beyond the grave. Warriors slain in battle, women who died in childbirth, and those sacrificed to the gods had distinct afterlives, often filled with honor and cosmic significance. For most others, however, the journey led to Mictlan, the vast underworld ruled by the stern Lord Mictlan and his wife Mictlantecuhtli. Mictlan was not a place of immediate reward or punishment, but a long, perilous journey. The soul of the deceased embarked on a 4-year passage through 9 different levels, each filled with obstacles and challenges. This journey was both a trial and a purification, stripping away ties to earthly existence until the soul could finally find rest in the deepest level of Mictlan. The Aztec vision emphasized endurance, courage, and ritual, reflecting a worldview where death was part of the cosmic balance, as essential as life itself. The first stage of the journey began with crossing the river Panahuya, aided by a loyal dog. Families often buried their dead with a dog, sometimes a hairless Zloitsquintly, believing the animal would guide the soul across the waters. Without this companion, the soul might be left stranded, unable to continue. This belief highlights the deep bond between humans and animals in Aztec thought, where even in death, companionship and loyalty remained vital. After crossing the river, the soul faced the mountains that crashed together, known as the Mictlan. These mountains ground together like living jaws, threatening to crush the traveler. Only by timing carefully could the soul pass through unscathed. Next came fields where winds cut with obsidian blades, stripping flesh from bone, and regions of icy mountains where the soul trembled in cold. Each level symbolized the hardships of letting go, trials that forced the soul to shed attachments to the world of the living. At another stage, the soul encountered a place where arrows rained constantly from the sky, demanding courage to continue. Then came the region where jaguars attacked, devouring the heart, a trial of bravery and sacrifice. Still further lay the place of obsidian smoke, where one could lose all sense of direction in choking darkness. Each step of the 9 levels represented both physical and spiritual challenges, as if the soul itself were being broken down and remade, tested for endurance before reaching peace. Finally, after years of traversing these realms, the soul arrived at the 9th and deepest level, Mictlan, where Mictlantecuhtli and Mictlantecuhtli presided. Here, the soul found rest, dissolving into the earth and merging with the cosmic cycle. Unlike heaven or paradise in other cultures, Mictlan was not a place of joy or reward, but of final stillness, where the soul ceased its journey and became part of the larger balance of the universe. In this way, The Aztec afterlife reflected their broader worldview, where life and death, sacrifice and renewal were all interconnected parts of cosmic order. Not all souls, however, went to Mictlan. Warriors who died in battle, or those sacrificed in ritual, were believed to accompany the sun in its daily journey across the sky. For 4 years, these souls rose with the sun, giving it strength before transforming into hummingbirds or butterflies. Women who died in childbirth were honored as equal to warriors, their spirits known as Siwatetio, fierce beings who also accompanied the sun and could sometimes return to haunt crossroads at night. Those who drowned or died of water-related causes were sent to Tlalocan, the lush paradise of Tlaloc, the rain god, where eternal spring and abundance awaited. Thus, the Aztec afterlife was not uniform, but diverse, shaped by the nature of death itself. Funerary practices reflected these beliefs. Bodies were often cremated, their ashes placed in vessels alongside offerings of food, personal possessions, and sometimes paper figures or dogs to aid in the journey. Priests performed rituals, chanting prayers to guide the soul, and families maintained altars with offerings. Death was not viewed with despair alone, but with reverence, as part of the sacred cycle of sacrifice and renewal that sustained both humans and gods. Festivals such as the Day of the Dead, with its roots in pre-Hispanic traditions, celebrated the continuing connection between the living and the departed, affirming that death was never a complete separation. The imagery of Mictlan, with its dark trials and final stillness, may seem daunting to modern minds. Yet for the Aztecs, it expressed the truth that existence was not meant to be easy or eternal, but was part of a greater cosmic pattern. Life fed death, death nourished life, and both sustained the gods who in turn sustained the world. To endure the 9 levels of Mictlan was to fulfill one's part in this endless balance, a journey not of personal glory, but of cosmic necessity. To imagine Mictlan is to picture a long path descending through mountains and rivers, winds and jaguars, arrows and smoke. It is to picture the soul trudging steadily, year after year, until it finally comes to rest in the presence of the Lord and Lady of Death. Around it, countless other souls continue their journeys, each step echoing the inevitability of mortality. And yet, above this underworld, warriors' souls dance with the sun, mother spirits soar as birds, and the drowned rest in eternal spring. The Aztec afterlife was not a single place, but a tapestry of destinies, each reflecting the sacred rhythms of life, death, and renewal. As you settle into this vision, imagine the sound of rushing rivers, the grinding of mountains, the whisper of obsidian blades in the wind. The journey is long, the path demanding, but it ends not in despair, but in stillness, where the soul joins the eternal cycle, embraced by the earth and the gods. For the Aztecs, this was not the end of meaning, but its fulfillment, a passage into the mystery at the heart of existence itself. Deep in the jungles of Central America, the Maya imagined an afterlife both haunting and elaborate, a place of darkness and trickery known as Xibalba, often translated as the place of fear. Unlike the structured journey of the Egyptians or the layered moral framework of the Greeks, the Mayan underworld was a realm of trials, deception, and gods who delighted in testing and tormenting the souls of the dead. The stories of Xibalba, preserved in texts like the Popol Vuh*, reveal a vision of the afterlife. It was as much about struggle as it was about transformation. The journey into Xibalba began with a descent into the earth, often envisioned as entering through caves, which the Maya regarded as sacred portals to the underworld. From these dark mouths of stone, the path led downward to rivers that had to be crossed, rivers of scorpions, blood, and pus, each one more horrifying than the last. Souls needed guidance to navigate these treacherous waters, often aided by burial offerings or ritual prayers. The imagery was vivid and unsettling, reminding the living that death was not a peaceful sleep, but a confrontation with danger and chaos. At the heart of Xibalba dwelled its lords, a council of fearsome beings who ruled over sickness, death, and suffering. Each lord represented a particular form of human affliction. There was one death and seven death, the chief rulers, and beneath them the lords of disease, starvation, pain, and accidents. Some were said to strike people suddenly in the street, while others caused lingering illnesses. These gods were not benevolent guardians, but capricious tormentors, taking pleasure in tricking and defeating souls who entered their realm. The very structure of Xibalba reflected this cruelty. Its roads branched deceptively. Its halls were designed to confuse, and its lords played endless games of humiliation upon their visitors. The most famous tale of Xibalba comes from the asterisk Popol Vuh asterisk, the sacred narrative of the Kaji Maya. In this story, two brothers, Hanapu and Xibalink, the hero twins, descended into Xibalba to avenge the death of their father and uncle, who had been lured to the underworld and killed by its lords. The twins faced countless trials. They were forced to sit on burning seats disguised as benches, to undergo nights in deadly houses filled with blades, jaguars, freezing cold, or suffocating darkness. The lords of Xibalba demanded they play a ritual ball game, a contest of life and death. Yet unlike other souls, the twins used wit and cunning to survive each trial, ultimately defeating the lords and transforming the underworld. Their triumph symbolized the victory of life and renewal over death and decay, echoing the cycles of nature that the Maya observed in their world. For ordinary souls, however, the journey through Xibalba was far less triumphant. Many were believed to suffer at the hands of its lords, enduring trials before reaching a final resting place. Unlike the Aztecs, who described a long but inevitable path to Mictlan, the Maya emphasized the treacherous nature of the afterlife. It was not guaranteed that all souls would find peace. Instead, they risked confusion, torment, and endless struggle, reflecting the uncertainty of life itself in a world of droughts, storms, and unpredictable harvests. The ball game itself, central to the asterisk Popol Vuh asterisk and to Mayan culture, carried deep symbolic meaning. Courts for the ball game were built in cities across the Mayan world, often aligned with cosmological patterns. The game represented not just sport, but the cosmic battle between life and death, between the sun and the darkness of the underworld. For some, losing the game could mean sacrifice, a ritual death that mirrored the passage into Xibalba. Thus, the living continually rehearsed and honored the struggles of the afterlife in their rituals and traditions. Funerary practices sought to prepare the dead for this perilous journey. Graves often contained offerings of food, water, and precious items to aid the soul. Jade beads, symbolizing breath and life, were sometimes placed in the mouths of the deceased, ensuring they carried vitality into the underworld. Dogs, as in Aztec traditions, were also thought to guide the dead across rivers. The living played an essential role, performing ceremonies to strengthen and protect their ancestors in Xibalba, maintaining bonds across the boundary of death. Yet, even in this vision of fear and trial, there was the possibility of renewal. The hero twins' victory showed that death was not absolute. Their triumph allowed for the continuation of life, the rising of the sun, and the cycles of maize, the sacred crop of the Maya. Death and life were locked in eternal struggle, and even the place of fear could be overcome through courage, wisdom, and the favor of the gods. This cyclical understanding reflected the Mayan calendar systems, which measured not only days and years, but cosmic cycles, endlessly repeating and renewing. To imagine Xibalba is to picture a world of darkness beneath the earth, its air thick and heavy, its rivers filled with venomous creatures. You step into halls where unseen eyes watch, and mocking voices of the lords echo in the shadows. Each trial strips away certainty, demanding endurance and cunning. Yet beyond the fear lies the possibility of transformation, the chance to join the eternal cycle of renewal, just as the hero twins did when they emerged victorious and became part of the celestial order. As you drift into this vision, imagine the flicker of torches in a cave, the sound of dripping water, the rush of unseen rivers. The path is perilous, yet it reflects the eternal truth of life, that through struggle comes renewal, and even in the place of fear, there is the promise of rebirth. The Maya saw the afterlife not only as a realm of shadows, but as part of the greater balance that sustained the cosmos, where death and life are forever intertwined. Across the misty landscapes of ancient Europe, in the forests, hills, and windswept coasts of Celtic lands, the afterlife was not a distant underworld of shadows, but a shimmering otherworld, close to the living, separated by thin veils that could be crossed in dreams, visions, or moments of magic. The Celts, whose beliefs were never written down by themselves, but preserved through myth, folklore, and later accounts, imagined death not as an end, but as a passage into a realm of beauty, enchantment, and mystery. This afterlife, often called the otherworld, was a place of eternal youth, feasting, and abundance, a land where time flowed differently, and the seasons never faded. The otherworld had many names across Celtic traditions. The Irish spoke of Tir na Nog, the land of youth, or Magmel, the plain of delight. The Welsh called it Enwyn, a realm ruled by its own lord, often depicted as benevolent, but also capable of challenge. These were not dark, punishing realms, but paradises, green and fertile, filled with endless feasts, music, and joy. To enter them was to step into a place where sorrow and aging could not follow, where the dead lived on in beauty and pleasure. Unlike the harsh visions of death in Mesopotamia or the long trials of Mictlan, the Celtic otherworld was a land of hope, offering comfort that death was a beginning rather than an end. The routes into the otherworld were many, often woven into the natural landscape. Lakes, rivers, caves, and burial mounds were believed to be portals, thresholds where one could pass between worlds. A hero might sail across the sea and find themselves in Tir na Nog, or stumble into a hollow hill and enter a realm of fairy beings. In some stories, the otherworld could be reached through dreams or visions, where the living were guided by spirits or gods. This closeness between the living world and the otherworld reflected the Celtic sense of a universe layered with magic, where boundaries were porous and the unseen was always near. The beings who ruled or inhabited these realms were often depicted as divine or fairy-like. The Tuatha Dé Danann, a race of powerful beings in Irish mythology, were said to dwell in the otherworld after their defeat in mortal battle. They became associated with the asterisk side asterisk, or fairy mounds, where their presence lingered. These beings were not distant gods, but neighbors in the unseen, sometimes aiding humans, sometimes luring them away. To enter their realm was to risk being enchanted, to lose one's sense of time, or to be changed forever. A single night spent in Tir na Nog could mean centuries passing in the human world, a reminder of the otherworld's strange relationship with time. Death was one of the surest ways to enter this realm, but not the only way. Heroes in Celtic tales often journeyed to the otherworld while still alive, sometimes invited, sometimes tricked. The story of Oisin, the Irish hero who traveled to Tir na Nog with the beautiful Niamh, tells of the allure of this paradise. There he lived in joy for what seemed like a short time, but when he returned to Ireland, centuries had passed, and he aged to dust the moment he set foot on mortal soil. Such stories reflected both the wonder and the danger of the otherworld, its beauty irresistible, its time eternal, but its separation from mortal life absolute. Funerary practices among the Celts reflected these beliefs in continuity and abundance. Graves were often filled with weapons, jewelry, food, and drinking vessels, as if preparing the dead for feasts in the otherworld. Chariots and horses were sometimes buried with warriors, ensuring they could continue their journeys in the afterlife. The Celts believed that what was placed in the grave would accompany the soul, not unlike the Egyptians' field of reeds or the offerings of the Chinese. Yet their vision emphasized not struggle or judgment, but the promise of joy, reunion, and eternal delight. The other world was not entirely free of challenge, however. Some tales speak of battles fought in Anwan, or of mortals tested by its rulers. The Welsh story of Pwyll, who traded places with Aran, the lord of Anwan, describes this realm as both mysterious and powerful, demanding respect. In these stories, the other world was not only a place of rest, but also of transformation, where mortals might gain wisdom, power, or insight before returning to their own world. Death carried them there permanently, but even in life, the boundary could be crossed by the chosen or the bold. Ghosts and spirits also played a role in Celtic belief. While the other world was a place of peace, some souls lingered, returning as shades or restless presences. Festivals like Samhain, marking the end of the harvest and the beginning of winter, were believed to thin the veil between worlds. On that night, the dead could return, mingling with the living, and offerings of food and drink were left out to honor and appease them. This blending of worlds reflected the Celtic understanding that death and life were not strictly separate, but intertwined, with the other world always close. To imagine the Celtic afterlife is to picture green meadows that never fade, feasts that never end, and music that echoes eternally across hills and seas. It is to see shining halls beneath mounds, where the Tuatha Dé Danann dance and feast, or to sail into the horizon and find a land of youth and joy. Time loses its grip, sorrow fades, and the soul lives on in beauty and abundance. Yet behind this beauty lies the reminder that the other world is not the mortal world. To return is to risk losing everything familiar, to find centuries have passed in the blink of an eye. As you rest in thought, imagine standing before a lake at twilight, the mist rising, the air hushed. Beneath its surface lies a world of endless light and music, waiting to receive the soul. You step forward, the veil parts, and you enter the other world, where death is not an end, but a passage into eternal youth, a place where joy lingers forever, and the cycles of life continue in realms unseen. In the ancient faith of Zoroastrianism, which arose in Persia more than 3,000 years ago, the afterlife was shaped by a profound moral vision. Unlike cultures that imagined the dead wandering in shadow regardless of their deeds, the Zoroastrians believed that every soul would face judgment, and that its fate, bliss, or torment depended on the balance of good and evil in its life. Central to this belief was the Chinvit Bridge, the Bridge of Judgment, a narrow crossing that every soul had to attempt after death. How the soul fared upon that bridge revealed the essence of its life and determined its eternal destination. The faith, founded on the teachings of the prophet Zarathustra, or Zoroaster, placed a strong emphasis on the cosmic struggle between good and evil. Ahura Mazda, the wise lord, represented truth, light, and order, while Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit, embodied deceit, darkness, and chaos. Human beings were participants in this struggle, their thoughts, words, and deeds contributing to either the side of order, *Isha*, or disorder, *Druze*. The afterlife was thus not random or indifferent, but a reflection of moral responsibility, where every action had weight beyond life itself. At the moment of death, it was believed that the soul lingered near the body for 3 days, while prayers and rituals were performed by family and priests. During this time, the soul experienced visions shaped by its deeds. A righteous soul might see a beautiful maiden, the embodiment of its good actions, who comforted and guided it. An evil soul, by contrast, might encounter a hideous hag, representing its lies and wickedness, tormenting it with fear. These visions prepared the soul for the crossing of the Chinvit Bridge. The Chinvit Bridge itself was a narrow path stretching over a yawning chasm that separated the world of the living from the realms of eternity. For the righteous, the bridge widened, becoming broad and safe, allowing the soul to cross into the house of song, a paradise of light, music, and eternal joy. There the soul joined the company of the just, dwelling in harmony with Ahura Mazda. For the wicked, however, the bridge narrowed to the width of a razor, cutting their feet, and the soul toppled into the abyss below, falling into the house of lies, a place of stench, darkness, and torment, where it suffered alongside the demons of Angkor Mainyu. The imagery was stark, emphasizing the importance of living truthfully and justly in the world of the living. This vision of judgment was not limited to a few, but applied to all, regardless of status or wealth. Kings and peasants alike faced the same test, judged not by birth but by deeds. In this way, Zoroastrian afterlife belief carried a strong sense of justice, ensuring that wrongdoers could not escape their fate, and that even the humble righteous would be rewarded. It reinforced a moral order that extended beyond the grave, encouraging people to act with honesty, compassion, and reverence for truth during their lives. Rituals surrounding death reflected these beliefs. Because the body was considered polluted after death, burial or cremation was avoided to prevent contamination of the sacred earth or fire. Instead, the dead were placed in dakmas, or towers of silence, where vultures consumed the flesh, leaving the bones to be bleached by the sun. This practice was not a denial of dignity, but an affirmation of purity, ensuring that death did not corrupt the natural elements. The bones, once clean, were gathered into ossuaries, marking the final resting place. Meanwhile, prayers and ceremonies helped guide the soul through its journey, invoking the protection of Ahura Mazda and the Amesha Spentus, the divine beings who aided in the cosmic struggle for truth. The Zoroastrian vision also carried a cosmic dimension. The judgment of individual souls was part of a larger process that would culminate in a final renewal, known as ***. At the end of time, it was believed that all souls would be purified, the power of evil destroyed, and the world remade into a place of perfection. Even the souls who had suffered in the house of lies would eventually be cleansed and restored, joining the righteous in eternal harmony. This hope of ultimate redemption distinguished Zoroastrianism from many other traditions, offering a vision of not only justice but also mercy, where the struggle between good and evil would be resolved for all. To imagine the Chinvit Bridge is to picture a narrow span stretching into the unknown, with light on one side and shadow on the other. A righteous soul steps confidently, the path widening, the maiden of good deeds guiding the way, the air filled with song and radiance. A wicked soul, by contrast, trembles as the bridge narrows, the abyss yawning below, the stench of lies rising until it slips and falls into torment. The crossing is both personal and cosmic, reflecting the moral weight of every life. As you reflect on this vision, imagine yourself standing at the edge of that bridge, the deeds of your life embodied beside you. The way ahead is shaped not by chance, but by truth, not by wealth, but by the choices made day by day. Beyond lies the house of song, where light never fades, or the house of lies, where shadows cling. Yet even in this stark division, the greater story promises renewal, a day when all souls purified will share in a world remade, free of darkness and filled with eternal peace. In the ancient traditions of Japan, the afterlife was often imagined as Yomi, the shadowy land of the dead. Unlike the bright paradise of Elysium or the moral judgment of the Chinvit Bridge, Yomi was a place of gloom and stillness, a mirror of the grave itself. Its name means the land of darkness, and once entered, it was nearly impossible to leave. The myths preserved in the *Kojiki** and *Nihon Shoki*, Japan's earliest chronicles describe Yomi not as a realm of reward or punishment, but as a cold, silent continuation of existence where the soul lingered, in shadow apart from the world of the living. The most famous story of Yomi tells of the deities Izanagi and Izanami, the primordial couple who gave birth to the islands of Japan. When Izanami died after giving birth to the fire god, her husband Izanagi descended into Yomi to bring her back. He entered through a dark cave, the threshold between worlds, and found his beloved. She told him she had already eaten the food of Yomi, binding her to the land of the dead, but promised to petition the rulers to let her return. Impatient, Izanagi lit a torch and looked upon her, only to see her body rotting, covered with maggots and crawling demons. Horrified, he fled, pursued by the guardians of Yomi, until he blocked the entrance with a boulder, sealing the land of the dead from the land of the living forever. From that moment, death became a permanent separation, and Yomi remained a realm closed off, where the dead could no longer return. This myth defined Yomi as a place of decay, silence, and inevitability. Unlike the paradises of other traditions, it offered no comfort. It was not a place of judgment, but of stasis, a shadowy echo of life. Yet Japanese belief about death was not limited to this bleak vision. Alongside Yomi, there was also the idea of spirits, or kami, who could linger among the living, and ancestors, who continued to influence and protect their descendants. The Shinto tradition emphasized reverence for these spirits, integrating the dead into the ongoing life of the community rather than exiling them entirely to Yomi. Funeral and memorial practices reflected this duality. In early times, the dead were often buried in large mounded tombs, known as kofan, which contained grave goods, mirrors, swords, and ornaments to accompany the deceased. These offerings, much like those in Egypt or Celtic lands, reflected the belief that the dead continued to need possessions in the afterlife. Over time, with the spread of Buddhism into Japan, new layers of belief developed. Buddhist teachings about reincarnation and karmic cycles blended with Shinto reverence for ancestors, creating a more complex vision of death and afterlife. Yomi remained as a dark and immutable realm, but the soul could also be imagined as moving through cycles of rebirth, or as attaining peace in Buddhist Pure Lands. Ancestor worship became central to Japanese practices. Families maintained household altars, or *Butsudan*, where tablets bearing the names of ancestors were enshrined. Offerings of food, incense, and prayers ensured that the spirits remained honored and content. Festivals such as Oben, held in summer, were dedicated to welcoming ancestral spirits back to the world of the living. Lanterns were lit to guide them, dances performed in their honor, and at the festival's end, lanterns were floated on rivers or seas to guide the spirits back to their realm. These practices softened the vision of Yomi, affirming that while the land of the dead might be distant and shadowy, the spirits of ancestors remained close, protective, and connected to the living. Ghosts, or *Yurei*, also played a role in Japanese thought. Unlike honored ancestors, *Yurei* were often restless, lingering due to unfinished business, betrayal, or improper funeral rites. These spirits could haunt the living, appearing as pale, disheveled figures with long hair and trailing white robes. The fear of becoming a restless ghost emphasized the importance of proper funerary rituals and remembrance. To be forgotten or dishonored was to risk wandering in bitterness rather than finding peace among the ancestors. The influence of Buddhism added new realms to the Japanese vision of the afterlife. The Pure Land sects taught of Amida Buddha, who welcomed the faithful into a paradise of light, where souls could achieve enlightenment more easily. This hope of paradise stood in contrast to the shadows of Yomi, offering comfort to those who devoted themselves in life. Over centuries, the bleakness of Yomi and the promise of Pure Land coexisted, reflecting the blending of indigenous and imported beliefs. Death could mean descent into Yomi, but also the possibility of rebirth or ascension into a realm of peace, depending on one's faith and actions. To imagine Yomi is to picture a silent cavern, cold and still, where countless souls linger in shadow. There is no joy, no torment, only stillness, a reflection of decay, and the inevitable end of life's warmth. Yet beyond Yomi's gloom, there are lanterns glowing in the night of Oben, the laughter of families honoring their ancestors, and the promise of pure lands shining in the distance. Death in Japan was never imagined in a single way, but as a tapestry of visions, bleak, hopeful, and always tied to the living through ritual and memory. As you drift in thought, imagine the cave entrance sealed by a great stone, separating the living world from Yomi's silence. Imagine lanterns glowing on a river, guiding spirits back to their resting place. In this vision, death is both shadow and light, separation and connection, an endless cycle of remembrance that ensures the dead are never wholly lost. Across the vast expanse of Africa, from savannas to forests, deserts to river valleys, diverse cultures developed unique visions of the afterlife. While each community held its own traditions, many shared a common thread: the belief that death was not an end, but a continuation of life in another realm, often described as an eternal village. In these traditions, the afterlife was deeply tied to ancestors, to the land, and to the rhythms of community. It was not a distant, abstract place, but an extension of daily life, where the dead continued to live, much as they had in this world, watching over the living and guiding them through memory, ritual, and spirit. For many African societies, ancestors were central to the afterlife. Death was seen not as a severing, but as a transition from being among the living to becoming an ancestor, a respected and powerful presence. Ancestors were thought to remain close, inhabiting the spiritual realm, but still deeply concerned with the well-being of their descendants. They were guardians, protectors, and judges, ensuring that traditions were upheld, morality was observed, and harmony was maintained. To honor them was to maintain the balance between worlds. To neglect them, however, risked anger and misfortune. The eternal village was imagined as a continuation of earthly existence. People lived much as before, tending fields, raising families, and joining in celebrations, but without the hardships of hunger, disease, or aging. In some traditions, the afterlife was described as a mirror image of the living world, just across a river or beyond a mountain. In others, it was a lush land of abundance, where ancestors gathered in joy and community. This vision emphasized continuity rather than rupture, assuring people that death did not erase identity or belonging, but carried it forward into a new realm. Rituals surrounding death ensured the proper passage of the soul. Funerals were elaborate, involving music, dance, drumming, and offerings. They were not only expressions of grief, but also celebrations of the deceased's transition to ancestorhood. The body might be buried with personal belongings, food, and tools, equipping the soul for its journey. In some communities, the graves were placed within or near villages, keeping the ancestors physically close. Libations of water, milk, or alcohol were poured onto the earth to feed the spirits, reinforcing the bond between the living and the departed. Every ritual act reaffirmed the idea that death did not sever ties, but wove them into a larger fabric of continuity. The role of ancestors was not only protective, but also disciplinary. Ancestors were believed to enforce morality, punishing wrongdoers with illness, misfortune, or infertility. When calamity struck, communities often turned to diviners or spiritual leaders to determine whether ancestral displeasure was the cause. If so, rituals of reconciliation were performed, offerings, sacrifices, or public confessions to restore harmony. In this way, the afterlife was not distant, but active, shaping daily life and social order. The fear of ancestral judgment encouraged ethical behavior, while the hope of ancestral blessing inspired reverence and gratitude. Among many African peoples, the land itself was sacred, a bridge between the living and the dead. Mountains, rivers, and forests were often regarded as dwelling places of spirits, and burial grounds were places of power where the worlds of the living and dead met. To disturb these places carelessly was to invite spiritual danger. Conversely, to honor them was to strengthen the community's bond with the ancestors. Festivals and rituals often took place at these sacred sites, linking the cycles of planting and harvest, birth and death, with the enduring presence of those who had gone before. Not all spirits, however, were benevolent. Just as in other cultures, restless or forgotten souls could become wandering ghosts, bringing harm to the living. Deaths that were violent, sudden, or dishonorable sometimes produced troubled spirits. To prevent this, proper funeral rites were essential. Neglect or failure to perform the correct rituals could leave a soul stranded, unable to join the eternal village, condemned to wander between worlds. This belief reinforced the importance of communal responsibility, ensuring that no one was left behind, that every life was honored in death. The variety of African beliefs was immense. In West Africa, the Yoruba spoke of the realm of the ancestors, where the spirits of the dead resided with Olodumare, a supreme god, until they were reborn. Among the Zulu, the Amidlozi or ancestral spirits were thought to guide dreams and protect families. The Akan of Ghana believed that the soul returned to the ancestral world after death, but could also reincarnate, continuing the cycle of life. Despite regional differences, a common theme persisted. Death was part of a larger cycle, one that maintained balance and continuity within the community. To imagine the African afterlife is to picture a village beyond the horizon, filled with familiar faces, where ancestors gather in laughter and song, free of suffering. It is to see libations poured onto the earth, smoke rising from offerings, and dances performed to honor the spirits. It is to hear drums echoing across the night, calling the dead to join the living in festival, reminding all that the boundary between worlds is thin, permeable, and alive with connection. As you rest in thought, imagine yourself walking into that eternal village. The huts glow warmly in the dusk, fires crackle, and the voices of ancestors call to you with welcome. You are not alone. You are part of a community that stretches back through countless generations, each life a thread in the fabric of eternity. Death here is not exile, but homecoming, not loss, but belonging, in a place where the cycle of life continues without end. Across the vast expanse of North America, Native American cultures developed diverse and powerful visions of the afterlife. While each nation and tribe had its own traditions, many shared the idea that death was not the end, but the beginning of a journey, one that carried the spirit into realms of sky, earth, or shadow. The afterlife was not simply a place of reward or punishment, but a continuation of the great cycles of nature, shaped by the land, the animals, and the sacred stories that defined each people's world. In these visions, the afterlife was as varied as the landscapes themselves, from the deserts of the southwest to the forests of the northeast, from the plains to the mountains. For many native traditions, the soul's journey after death was imagined as a path, often leading westward toward the setting sun. The west, with its fading light, symbolized the gateway into the spirit world. This path was not always smooth. In some traditions, the soul crossed rivers, climbed mountains, or faced trials before reaching its destination. For example, the Lakota spoke of the spirit crossing the Milky Way, which they called the Spirit Road, guided by a dog who ensured only those who had lived rightly could pass. If the soul failed, it might fall into darkness below, unable to reach the land of the ancestors. Such imagery emphasized the importance of living well, not in terms of wealth or power, but of honor, respect, and harmony with the community and the natural world. The afterlife itself was often envisioned as a land much like the living world, but perfected. Among the Plains peoples, it was described as a place of endless hunting, with abundant buffalo and fertile grasslands, where warriors could ride and hunt without hardship. For agricultural peoples, the afterlife might be pictured as fertile fields, where crops never failed and families thrived in peace. This vision reflected the close relationship between each culture and its environment. The afterlife was not distant or alien, but a continuation of the familiar world, transformed into a place of balance and abundance. In the southwest, the Hopi and other Pueblo peoples spoke of a layered cosmos with multiple worlds connected by passages. After death, the spirit was said to journey westward to the village of the dead, beneath the earth, where it joined ancestors in watching over the living. The spirits of the dead became *Khina*, powerful beings who brought rain, fertility, and blessings. The living honored them with dances and rituals, ensuring the cycle of life continued. Here, the afterlife was not only about the soul's rest, but about its ongoing role in sustaining the world. Among the Iroquois, the afterlife was described as a land of abundance and peace, a mirror of the earth, but free from sorrow. The soul traveled a path marked by obstacles, aided by rituals and prayers performed by the living. The continuity between life and afterlife emphasized the importance of community, memory, and respect for tradition. The dead were not cut off, but remained part of the circle of life, influencing the living through dreams, omens, and guidance. Some traditions spoke of a division between souls based on conduct. The Cherokee, for example, believed that those who lived rightly and followed sacred law entered a good afterlife, while those who lived wickedly might wander as restless spirits. Yet even these visions were less about eternal torment than about imbalance, with the goal of restoring harmony. The emphasis was on living in balance with the earth, with family, and with spirit, rather than adhering to rigid moral codes. The vision of the sky also played an important role. Many tribes looked upward, seeing the Milky Way as the path of souls. Stars were often thought to be the fires of ancestors, shining down on the living. The Blackfoot told of souls traveling a trail of light, guided by the moon, while the Ojibwa believed the northern lights were the dancing spirits of the dead. These celestial visions connected the afterlife to the rhythms of the sky, affirming that the soul's journey was written into the cosmos itself. Funerary practices varied widely, but they often reflected the journey of the soul. Bodies might be placed on scaffolds to return to the sky and wind, or buried with tools, weapons, and food to aid the spirit. Ceremonies of mourning were accompanied by songs, dances, and prayers, ensuring that the spirit found its way. The living maintained a bond with the dead, speaking their names, recounting their stories, and calling on their guidance. Forgetting the dead was seen as a greater loss than death itself, for memory kept the spirit alive within the community. To imagine the Native American afterlife is to picture a path stretching into the west, where the sun sets and the stars rise. It is to see a spirit walking across the Milky Way, guided by a loyal dog, moving toward a land where ancestors wait with open arms. It is to hear the rustle of buffalo herds, the laughter of families, the songs of Kashinas, calling rain to the earth. The afterlife here is not exile or judgment, but continuation, a reflection of the cycles of nature, where death leads into life, and the living and the dead remain forever connected. As you rest in this vision, imagine the horizon glowing with twilight, the first stars appearing overhead. The path lies before you, stretching into light and shadow, guided by the rhythm of nature itself. You walk it with calm, knowing that at its end lies not emptiness but reunion, not silence but the eternal circle of life, where ancestors and spirits dwell, and where the soul finds its place among the stars. The roots of afterlife belief in the Western religious traditions of Judaism and Christianity reveal fascinating evolution, from shadowy and uncertain beginnings to the vivid imagery of heaven, hell, and resurrection. These traditions shaped not only personal faith, but also entire cultures, offering comfort, warning, and meaning to generations seeking to understand what lay beyond the grave. To explore them is to trace the journey of ideas as concepts of Sheol and resurrection in ancient Judaism, transformed into the Christian visions of eternal life and judgment that would later shape much of the world. In the earliest layers of Hebrew tradition, death led all souls to Sheol, a shadowy underworld beneath the earth. Sheol was not a place of torment or bliss, but a land of silence, where the dead existed in a dim and neutral state, cut off from the living and from God. Kings and commoners alike descended there, stripped of earthly distinctions. The Psalms often speak of Sheol as a place of stillness, where no praise is sung and no work is done. This early vision bore similarities to Mesopotamian and Greek ideas of the underworld, emphasizing the inevitability of death rather than reward or punishment. Over time, Jewish thought began to shift, influenced by both internal developments and encounters with other cultures. Prophets like Isaiah and Ezekiel offered visions of resurrection, where God would raise the dead and restore life. The book of Daniel, written during a time of persecution, described a future where many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. This was one of the first clear articulations of a dual afterlife, where moral conduct in life determined destiny after death. It marked a departure from the shadowy neutrality of Sheol toward a vision of justice that extended beyond the grave. The idea of resurrection became central to some Jewish groups, such as the Pharisees, who believed in a bodily restoration of the dead at the end of days. Others, such as the Sadducees, denied the afterlife altogether, holding to the older view of Sheol. This diversity of belief reflected the dynamic and evolving nature of Jewish thought, shaped by changing times, foreign influence, and the need to reconcile suffering with faith in divine justice. For communities enduring conquest and exile, the hope of resurrection and judgment offered reassurance that God's justice would ultimately prevail. Out of this evolving tradition, early Christianity emerged, carrying forward the Jewish belief in resurrection, but transforming it through the life and teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. Central to Christian faith was the resurrection of Jesus himself, seen as the first fruits of what awaited all who believed. Death, in this vision, was not the final word, but a conquered enemy. The Apostle Paul wrote of the dead being raised incorruptible, transformed into spiritual bodies. The promise of eternal life, secured through faith and the grace of God, became the cornerstone of Christian afterlife belief. A Christian vision expanded into vivid imagery of heaven and hell. Heaven was described as the dwelling place of God, a realm of light, joy, and eternal communion with the divine. The book of Revelation offered striking pictures of golden streets, jeweled walls, and a tree of life, where there was no more sorrow or death. Hell, by contrast, was portrayed as a place of separation from God, of fire and torment, reserved for those who rejected truth and lived in wickedness. These images were drawn partly from Jewish apocalyptic traditions, partly from Greco-Roman ideas of punishment, and partly from the moral framework of the new faith. Judgment lay at the heart of this vision. Each soul, upon death, faced a reckoning. The righteous, through faith and virtue, were welcomed into eternal life, while the wicked were cast into eternal punishment. Over centuries, theologians debated the nature of this judgment, whether it occurred immediately upon death or at the final resurrection at the end of time. Some emphasized the mercy of God, others the necessity of justice. Yet the central message remained: life had eternal consequences, and how one lived shaped what lay beyond. Jewish and Christian practices reflected these beliefs in varied ways. In Judaism, mourning rituals such as sitting Shiva, and prayers like the Kaddish emphasized the community's role in honoring the dead and sustaining their memory. In Christianity, funerals often included prayers for the soul's rest, affirming hope in resurrection and eternal life. Cemeteries became sacred spaces, not only of grief but of expectation, where the dead awaited the final day. Both traditions placed great importance on remembrance, ensuring that the dead were never forgotten, but woven into the ongoing life of the community. The moral weight of these beliefs shaped daily life. The hope of heaven encouraged perseverance through suffering, while the fear of hell warned against wrongdoing. The promise of resurrection gave meaning to sacrifice, inspiring martyrs and shaping entire movements of faith. At the same time, the diversity of interpretations allowed for multiple visions, some emphasizing God's justice, others his mercy, some imagining eternal torment, others eventual restoration. To imagine these early concepts is to picture first the shadowy halls of Sheol, where silence reigns and all are equal in death. Then, over time, to see light breaking into that darkness. The promise of resurrection, the vision of judgment, the hope of eternal life with God. It is to hear the trumpet call described by Paul, summoning the dead to rise, their bodies transformed into glory. It is to see a city of light, where sorrow has ended, and to know that in this vision, death is not an end, but a passage into eternity. As you rest in this vision, imagine yourself standing at the edge of Sheol, where shadows linger, and lifting your eyes to see dawn breaking, light pouring in, and the promise of renewal rising. The early Jewish and Christian afterlife was not only a place of mystery, but of hope, where death itself was overcome by the promise of God's justice and mercy, and where the soul found meaning in eternity. In the ancient Mediterranean world, alongside the well-known public religions of Greece and Rome, there existed secretive traditions known as the mystery religions. Unlike the state cults, which honored the gods with festivals, sacrifices, and processions open to all, the mysteries were intimate, selective, and deeply personal. They promised initiates something the public rituals rarely did: hope for a blessed afterlife. For those who joined, death was not an abyss of shadows, but a passage into divine fellowship, eternal joy, and renewal. These secret paths, often veiled in ritual and guarded by oath, shaped the spiritual lives of countless people who sought meaning beyond the grave. Among the most famous were the Eleusinian mysteries of Greece, devoted to Demeter and her daughter Persephone. The myth at the heart of these rites told of Persephone's abduction by Hades and her mother Demeter's grief, which caused the earth to wither until her daughter was allowed to return for part of each year. This cycle of descent and return mirrored the rhythms of nature, death and rebirth, decay and renewal. To be initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries was to participate in rituals that reenacted this myth, experiencing the descent into darkness and the return to light. Though the precise details of the ceremonies were kept secret, ancient writers suggested that initiates emerged with a profound sense of peace, convinced that death was not the end, but a gateway to a blessed existence. The Orphic mysteries offered another path. Inspired by the mythical poet Orpheus, who ventured into the underworld in search of his beloved Eurydice, these teachings emphasized the soul's divine origin and its entrapment in the cycle of rebirth. Through purification, ritual, and secret knowledge, the soul could escape this cycle and return to its true, eternal home. Orphic initiates often carried small gold tablets inscribed with instructions for the afterlife, buried with them to guide their souls. These tablets contained directions on how to navigate the underworld, what rivers to avoid, and what declarations to make before the gods. "I am a child of earth and starry heaven," some inscriptions read, affirming the soul's divine heritage. Such words were believed to secure the soul's passage to eternal bliss. The cult of Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, and transformation, also carried strong associations with the afterlife. Dionysian rites involved music, dance, and ecstatic release, breaking down boundaries between mortal and divine. Death, in this vision, was not to be feared, but embraced as a transformation, a return to divine unity. Some believed that initiates of Dionysus would share in the god's own resurrection and immortality, freed from the decay of mortal life. The themes of death and rebirth, suffering and renewal wove through the rituals, offering hope that the soul could transcend its earthly limits. The mysteries were not confined to Greece. In Rome, foreign mystery cults spread widely, offering alternative visions of the afterlife. The cult of Isis, imported from Egypt, promised her devotees protection in life and salvation in death. The goddess was portrayed as a motherly savior, guiding her followers into eternal life. The Mithraic mysteries, popular among Roman soldiers, centered on the god Mithras, who slew a cosmic bull and brought renewal to the world. Initiates underwent a series of graded rituals in subterranean temples, experiencing symbolic death and rebirth, and were promised eternal fellowship with Mithras after death. These cults, though varied, shared the conviction that secret initiation granted the soul a special destiny beyond the grave. What united the mystery religions was their focus on personal salvation. Unlike public rituals, which honored the gods for the sake of civic order and prosperity, the mysteries addressed the individual's fear of death and longing for immortality. To be initiated was to gain access to knowledge, rituals, and divine favor that transformed the afterlife from uncertainty into hope. The secrecy of these rites gave them power, for only those within the circle shared in their promises. For outsiders, the mysteries were a source of fascination, suspicion, and sometimes hostility, yet their allure endured for centuries. The mystery religions also reflected the changing spiritual climate of the ancient world. As empires expanded, cities grew, and individuals felt lost in vast societies, people sought more personal forms of faith. The mysteries provided intimate community, powerful symbolism, and assurance of meaning beyond death. They offered a sense of belonging, not just in life, but in eternity. For many, this was profoundly comforting, a refuge in a world where traditional beliefs often left the afterlife vague or bleak. To imagine the mysteries is to picture torch-lit ceremonies in secret halls, initiates gathered in silence as priests reenacted sacred myths. It is to hear the chanting of hymns, to feel the shiver of descent into darkness, and the relief of return into light. It is to carry, in life and in death, the secret knowledge that promised safe passage and eternal joy. Death, in this vision, was not a fall into oblivion, but an initiation into the deepest mystery of all. As you drift in thought, imagine yourself standing among the initiates, cloaked in secrecy, the air filled with incense and whispers. The doors close, the ritual begins, and you are led into darkness, only to emerge into light reborn. The promise lingers, that in death, as in the mystery, you will not be lost, but transformed, joining the company of gods and souls who live forever in the realms beyond. Throughout history, humanity has prepared the dead with care, ritual, and reverence. Across cultures, funerary practices serve not only to mourn loss, but to guide the soul into the next world, to protect it, and to ensure that life continued beyond death. The objects placed in graves, the ceremonies performed, and the words spoken over the dead reveal much about how ancient peoples understood the afterlife. Grave goods and rituals were more than mere customs. They were keys to eternity, tokens of love, and bridges between the worlds of the living and the dead. The Egyptians stand as one of the most famous examples. Their tombs, filled with treasures, food, clothing, and tools, were designed to provide for the Ka and Ba in the afterlife. Even board games like Senet were placed beside the deceased for leisure in eternity. Canopic jars preserved organs, while amulets offered protection against demons of the underworld. The tomb itself was painted with images of servants, fields, and harvests, ensuring that the dead would find the field of reeds a place of abundance. For pharaohs, treasures of gold and magnificent sarcophagi proclaimed their eternal kingship. Yet even common people, though humbler, sought to carry food, jewelry, or charms with them, testifying to a shared belief that death required preparation. In Mesopotamia, burials were more modest, but no less significant. Families placed jars of beer, bread, and water in tombs, knowing that the dead would otherwise eat dust in Irkalla. Small figurines, tools, and personal items were buried with loved ones. The offerings were not intended to enrich the afterlife, but to sustain the shades, ensuring they would not return as restless ghosts. Here, the grave goods were acts of devotion and protection, tying the living to the dead in a cycle of care that continued long after the funeral. The Greeks placed coins in the mouths or on the eyes of their dead, payment for Charon, the ferryman of the Styx. Without this token, the soul risked being stranded on the wrong side of the river. Alongside the coin, bodies were often buried with oil jars, weapons, or ornaments. The Athenians sometimes placed pottery inscribed with prayers or names, ensuring the soul was remembered. In this way, the grave became both a preparation for the journey and a monument to memory, a way of anchoring the soul in both worlds. The Celts furnished graves with weapons, chariots, and jewelry, imagining the afterlife as a continuation of earthly life in the otherworld. Warriors were buried with swords and shields, while nobles rested with feasting vessels and ornaments. Horses, too, were sometimes sacrificed and buried alongside their masters, ensuring they could ride into the eternal fields. This belief that the afterlife mirrored life underscored the importance of status, identity, and continuity, carrying the symbols of earthly honor into the eternal realm. In China, graves reflected the powerful presence of ancestors in daily life. Tombs contained food, clothing, and models of servants or animals to serve the deceased. With the rise of paper offerings, entire worlds could be symbolically sent across. Houses, money, even servants crafted of folded paper, burned to provide for the ancestors. The tomb of Qin Shi Huang, with its terracotta army, stands as the grandest example, thousands of soldiers and horses buried to protect the emperor in eternity. Yet even the humblest grave carried tokens of devotion, affirming the bond between the living and the dead. In Mesoamerica, both the Maya and Aztecs buried their dead with items to guide them through dangerous journeys. Dogs were placed in tombs or depicted on burial offerings to lead souls across rivers. Food and water accompanied the deceased, sustaining them through trials. The Maya often placed jade beads in the mouth, symbolizing the breath of life, while the Aztecs offered paper, knives, and figurines to aid the soul through Mictlan's 9 levels. Funerary offerings were essential tools of survival, as important to the dead as they were to the living's peace of mind. Among the Norse, burial mounds were filled with weapons, jewelry, and ships. Warriors were interred with swords, shields, and armor, prepared to join the battles of Valhalla. Ships, whether full-sized vessels or smaller models, carried the dead into the next world. Women, too, were honored with brooches, beads, and household tools, reflecting their roles in life. Funeral pyres turned bodies to ash, sending smoke skyward, a bridge between worlds. These rituals affirmed not only belief in the afterlife, but also the enduring importance of honor, courage, and kinship. In Africa, funerary practices varied widely, but often emphasized the role of ancestors. Graves included food, drink, and personal items, ensuring comfort in the eternal village. Libations were poured, dances performed, and offerings made to guide the soul and secure its place among the honored dead. To fail in these rituals risked leaving the soul restless, wandering, or angry. The objects placed in graves were not luxuries, but necessities, symbols of love and respect that carried power in both worlds. What unites these diverse practices is the conviction that death demands preparation. To die without ritual, without offerings, was to risk being lost, forgotten, or powerless. To die with proper care, by contrast, was to step into eternity with dignity, provision, and guidance. Grave goods were tokens of continuity, expressions of memory, and bridges across the gulf of mortality. They turned the grave into a place not of abandonment, but of connection, a home for the soul beyond life. To imagine these rituals is to walk among tombs filled with treasures, to see coins placed gently on the eyes of the dead to hear, drums at a funeral dance, or to watch a ship set aflame on the waves. Each act speaks of love, fear, and hope, Each object tells a story of what people believed mattered in life, and what they hoped would endure beyond death. Across time and cultures, these offerings reflect the universal truth that in the face of mortality, humanity has always sought to carry a piece of life into eternity. As you reflect, imagine yourself standing by a grave, the air filled with incense, the sound of voices chanting. In the hands of mourners, offerings are placed: food, tools, treasures, or tokens. Each one carries weight, each one a bridge across the boundary. In this vision, funerary rituals are not about endings, but about continuations, about ensuring that the soul does not walk alone, but enters the afterlife with love and memory at its side. Wherever humans have lived, they have told stories of the dead who linger among the living. Though most traditions describe peaceful realms for ancestors or souls, nearly every culture also speaks of those who cannot rest: ghosts, spirits, and restless dead. These figures haunt the boundary between life and death, embodying fears of improper burial, unfinished business, or divine punishment. Their presence in myths and folklore reveals how deeply people have feared being forgotten, dishonored, or trapped between worlds, and how communities developed rituals to keep the dead at peace. In Mesopotamia, restless spirits were dreaded as dangerous intruders. The living believed that the dead who lacked proper burial or offerings wandered hungry, returning to afflict the living with sickness, nightmares, or madness. These beings were called ***, shades that roamed because their descendants had neglected them. To prevent such hauntings, families brought regular offerings of food and water to graves. Priests recited incantations to banish or appease ghosts, reinforcing the belief that the bond between living and dead had to be carefully maintained. To forget the dead was to risk their return. Egyptian traditions also included restless spirits, though their vision of the afterlife was largely ordered by Mat, the goddess of truth. Ghosts might return if their tombs were disturbed, if their mummification was faulty, or if their memory was neglected. Letters to the dead, inscribed on pottery or papyrus, have survived from ancient Egypt, in which the living pleaded with spirits to cease troubling them. These letters suggest that even in a culture with elaborate preparations for eternity, the possibility of unrest was ever present. A restless Egyptian ghost was often thought to seek justice, reminding descendants of their duties. In Greece, restless spirits were known as ***ataphioi, those who had not received proper burial. Homer's epics are filled with the importance of funerary rites. Without them, the soul could not enter Hades. The shade of Patroclus, in the *Iliad*, begs Achilles to burn his body so he may cross into the underworld. The Greeks also feared the *oioroi*, the souls of those who died young or violently, and the *biaiothanatoi*, those who died by force. These spirits, trapped by the nature of their deaths, were thought to haunt the living. Festivals such as the Anthesteria in Athens allowed the spirits of the dead to roam temporarily, after which rituals were performed to send them back. Here, the boundary between living and dead was acknowledged as porous but manageable, provided the proper rites were observed. The Romans, inheriting Greek ideas, spoke of *lemuries* and *larvae*, malevolent spirits who disturbed the living. The festival of Lemuria was held each year to exorcise these restless dead. The head of the household walked barefoot through the home at midnight, casting beans behind him as offerings to the spirits and reciting prayers to banish them. Not all spirits were harmful, however. The *Lares*, protective household gods, were often ancestral spirits who brought blessing. The contrast between honored ancestors and restless ghosts underscored the importance of memory and ritual in determining the fate of the dead. In Northern Europe, the Norse feared the *Draugr*, undead beings who rose from their graves with unnatural strength. Unlike shadowy ghosts, the Draugr were corporeal, often grotesque and bloated, guarding treasure in their burial mounds or seeking vengeance against the living. To prevent such hauntings, graves were sometimes sealed with care, weapons were placed to bind the dead, or burial mounds were marked with protective runes. The draugr reflected fears of improper burial and the idea that the dead could return physically if not respected. Tales of heroes battling these revenants became staples of saga literature, combining myth, morality, and fear. In Japan, restless spirits were known as ***. Unlike honored ancestors, yurei lingered because of unresolved emotions, anger, sorrow, betrayal, or the lack of proper rituals. They were often depicted with long, disheveled hair, pale faces, and white burial robes. Folk tales describe them haunting specific places, demanding acknowledgement or revenge. The rituals of Oban and Buddhist ceremonies were designed in part to pacify such spirits, ensuring they moved on to peace. This balance between honoring ancestors and appeasing restless ghosts reveals the dual nature of death in Japanese belief, both a source of protection and a source of danger. African traditions also spoke of restless spirits. While ancestors were usually benevolent, those who died dishonorably or without ritual could become wandering ghosts. Some were thought to bring illness or misfortune until the proper rites were performed. Ritual specialists, diviners, or healers often mediated between the living and the dead, diagnosing spiritual unrest and prescribing offerings or ceremonies to restore balance. To die without community support was one of the greatest fears, for it risked leaving the soul untethered, without a place in the eternal village. In Mesoamerica, both the Aztecs and Maya believed that certain souls might linger as dangerous spirits. Those who died violently or without proper offerings could become disruptive, haunting the living with sickness or accidents. Rituals of appeasement, sacrifices, and offerings sought to pacify them. The Day of the Dead, rooted in pre-Columbian traditions, was not only a celebration of ancestors, but also a time to ensure that wandering souls were fed, honored, and guided, preventing them from becoming restless or harmful. Even in early Christianity and Judaism, echoes of restless spirits remained. The Hebrew Bible occasionally speaks of shades in Sheol, and later Jewish folklore included the ***, a wandering soul that could possess the living. Early Christian thought emphasized resurrection and eternal judgment, but folk traditions persisted about ghosts appearing as warnings, omens, or reminders of the need for prayer. These beliefs reflected the enduring fear that the dead might not always rest quietly, but could return if neglected, wronged, or forgotten. To imagine these myths is to picture the world as alive with unseen presences. Shadows at the edge of firelight, voices in the night, footsteps in empty rooms. Some spirits are benevolent, guiding and protecting, while others are restless, demanding recognition or justice. Each culture developed rituals, offerings, prayers, festivals to ensure that the dead remained at peace. The universality of these beliefs reminds us of a deep human concern, that death, if not properly honored, might spill back into life, blurring the boundary between the two. As you drift into this vision, imagine a quiet night, the air still, when suddenly the sense of presence grows. A shadow moves, a whisper stirs, and you feel the weight of those who came before. Yet with ritual, remembrance, and care, the restless are calmed, and the living and the dead find harmony once more. In this way, myths of ghosts remind us of the enduring connection across the boundary of death and the importance of honoring those who came before us. Across civilizations, the way people imagined the afterlife profoundly shaped how they lived their daily lives. These beliefs were not abstract speculations, but guiding principles that influenced morality, politics, social structure, and even the smallest rituals of daily existence. To study them is to see how the hope of paradise, the fear of torment, or the duty to ancestors translated into choices, actions, and entire systems of meaning. The afterlife was not only about death, it was about life, giving purpose, structure, and direction to the living. In Egypt, the belief in the Duat and the judgment of the heart before Osiris encouraged people to live according to Ma'atat, the principle of truth, justice, and cosmic order. Farmers, scribes, and kings alike were reminded that their deeds would be weighed, that cruelty or dishonesty could doom them to annihilation by Ammit. This belief tied morality to eternity, making the maintenance of harmony not only a civic duty, but also a spiritual necessity. The construction of tombs, the offering of food, and the daily rituals in temples were extensions of this belief, each act reinforcing the idea that life and death were woven into a continuous cycle. In Mesopotamia, the bleak vision of Akala influenced communities to value proper funerary rites and the care of the dead. Since all souls shared the same shadowy fate, the focus was on sustaining ancestors with offerings, ensuring they did not return as restless ghosts. Here, the emphasis was less on moral judgment and more on familial duty. The living were responsible for maintaining harmony with the dead, and in doing so, they upheld the balance of community life. Neglect was not just a personal failing, but a danger to everyone, for forgotten souls might bring misfortune upon the entire household. Among the Greeks, the layered underworld of Hades, with its neutral asphodel meadows, torturous Tartarus, and blissful Elysium, reinforced the value of moderation, piety, and heroism. To live with hubris, disrespecting the gods, or neglecting sacred duties, risked punishment. To live honorably, by contrast, promised reward. Funerary practices, like the placement of coins for Karen, underscored the importance of ritual in securing one's place. Tragedies like Antigone revealed the seriousness of burial rites, showing that neglecting them was a crime not just against family, but against divine law. In this way, the Greek vision tied social duty, religious piety, and personal morality into a cohesive whole. The Norse, with their emphasis on Valhalla and Hel, shaped a culture where courage and honor in battle were paramount. To die bravely was to earn eternal glory, while to die in cowardice or weakness was to pass into the cold shadows of hell. This belief created a society that valued bravery, loyalty, and resilience, where warriors sought to face death without fear, knowing it was fated. Even beyond the battlefield, this ethos encouraged a life lived boldly, with honor and strength as the ultimate measures of worth. Funeral pyres, ship burials, and the recitation of sagas reinforced this vision, ensuring that memory and legacy carried the soul into eternity. In India, the Hindu vision of samsara and karma encouraged ethical behavior, compassion, and a sense of responsibility toward all beings. Since actions in this life directly shaped future rebirths, individuals were urged to act with nonviolence, generosity, and truthfulness. The ultimate goal of moksha, liberation from the cycle, inspired spiritual seekers to pursue meditation, knowledge, and devotion. Here, the afterlife was not just a destination, but a process that infused daily life with purpose. Every action, no matter how small, became meaningful in the larger arc of the soul's journey. The Aztecs and Maya, with their visions of perilous journeys through Mictlan or Xibalba, emphasized the importance of ritual preparation and communal duty. Families buried their dead with offerings, dogs, and food, ensuring the soul could survive its trials. The bravery of warriors and the sacrifice of mothers in childbirth were celebrated, granting them special fates in the afterlife. These beliefs reinforced a culture where sacrifice, both literal and symbolic, was central to maintaining cosmic balance. Death was not feared, but embraced as part of the cycle of life and renewal, binding individuals to the larger rhythms of the cosmos. In China, the role of ancestors shaped family structures, morality, and social order. To honor one's parents and ancestors was to ensure their peace and, in turn, to secure blessings for the living. Filial piety became a cornerstone of ethics, not only out of respect, but because neglect risked spiritual unrest. The blending of Confucian duty, Taoist ritual, and Buddhist karma created a worldview where death was an extension of life, and the living were always accountable to both the past and the future. Ancestors were not gone but present, influencing prosperity, health, and harmony. For early Christians and Jews, the hope of resurrection, heaven, or eternal life encouraged perseverance through suffering and fidelity to God's commandments. Martyrs embraced death with courage, confident of paradise. Communities found strength in the belief that injustices in this world would be corrected in the next. The fear of hell and the promise of heaven shaped moral codes, encouraging charity, humility, and faith. These beliefs created a framework where daily life was lived with eternity in mind, where choices were measured not only by their earthly consequences, but by their weight in the scales of divine judgment. Even the more mysterious traditions, like the Eleusinian or Mithraic mysteries, revealed how afterlife beliefs inspired transformation in the living. Initiates emerged with new courage, hope, and peace, no longer fearing death. Their secret rituals gave them not only promises for eternity, but also meaning in the present, reinforcing bonds of community and personal identity. To live with the knowledge of mystery was to live with a sense of belonging to something greater. Across cultures, the idea of restless spirits reinforced the importance of proper ritual, memory, and respect. The fear of ghosts reminded the living to care for the dead, to perform ceremonies with diligence, and to maintain bonds across generations. These practices wove death into daily life, ensuring that the community was whole and no soul was left behind. To imagine how these beliefs shaped the living is to see farmers in Egypt leaving offerings for their ancestors, warriors in Scandinavia embracing their fated deaths with courage, families in China burning paper houses for their ancestors, and initiates in Greece stepping into torchlit halls to face the mysteries of life and death. Each act reveals a truth, that belief in the afterlife was not only about death, but about how to live meaningfully, ethically, and with hope. As you reflect, imagine yourself living in one of these worlds, where every action carries weight beyond the grave, where ancestors watch, gods judge, and souls continue their journeys. The afterlife in all its diversity served as both mirror and guide shaping human life with the promise that death was not the end, but a passage one that gave meaning to the lives of those still walking beneath the sun. As we have journeyed together through these many visions of the afterlife, across lands and cultures separated by oceans and centuries, one truth has emerged again and again. Humanity has never accepted death as a simple ending. Instead, we have filled the unknown with stories, with rituals, and with hope. From the golden fields of the Egyptians to the shadowed halls of Mesopotamia, from the warrior's Valhalla to the ancestor villages of Africa, from the cycles of Hindu rebirth to the shimmering Celtic, otherworld people everywhere have sought to give meaning to what lies beyond life. These beliefs shaped not only how they buried their dead, but how they lived each day, guided by duty, morality, and the promise of something greater than themselves. Though the details differ, some imagining paradise, others shadow others, cycles of endless renewal, the impulse is the same: to weave death into the story of life, to assure ourselves that we do not vanish into nothing, but pass into a realm where memory, spirit, or eternity awaits. Even the myths of restless ghosts and hungry shades remind us of this need, warning us never to forget the ties that bind us across generations. Death, in all these visions, is not silence, but transformation, a continuation of the human story in realms unseen. Here on History for Sleep Asterisk, our goal is to share these stories gently, weaving together the past into words that help you rest. If you have found calm, peace, or a new spark of curiosity in tonight's journey, I invite you to subscribe to the channel so that you never miss another story. And I would love to hear from you. Share in the comments what times you listen and what parts of history you'd like us to explore next. Your thoughts guide where we travel, just as the living once guided the spirits of their ancestors with offerings and prayers. Now, as you let go of the waking world and drift deeper into rest, imagine yourself stepping gently across the threshold, joining the countless souls who have walked before. The stories of the afterlife are many, but tonight they come together as one soothing truth: that death has always been a mystery, but never a lonely one. You are part of an endless chain of memory, of life, of humanity's search for meaning. Let that thought carry you softly into dreams, where history and rest meet in quiet harmony.